What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the debut albums from melodic death metal bands. Alright, and as always, given that this is just my opinion and there is no such thing as an objective ranking, there will be hot takes, and if that makes you mad, I just don't care.
Bye, Felicia.
Also, to make things interesting, I'm limiting each tier to only 4 albums. Let's get into it with Nightrage, Sweet Vengeance. So, kicking off their career with this very aggressive sound that's obviously inspired by like Slaughter of the Soul. Great dynamics too, with both the thrashy, faster stuff and then more mid-paced, melodically focused ones. Very earworm a la In Flames as well. The clean singing is a little bit yarly and corny, especially on Circle of Pain, but pretty infrequent, so it pulls it down slightly, but only just so. So otherwise, a really excellent album. I'm going to put it at A tier. Alright, a real classic here, Children of Bodom with Something Wild. Very solid album, obviously, especially for a debut. Of course, given the legacy of this band, it's the riffs that really stand out, especially on tracks like Lake Bodom, which is an absolute banger. I also dig the more symphonic moments, like on The Nail. Really great energy all the way through, and it's definitely one that has grown on me since I first heard it. The only thing that pulls it down a bit, similar to that last album, is some pretty questionable, yarly, clean vocals. I don't know why that's like a trend with some of these, and I think there are more coming up that have this as well. But on this one, it's worse than on that previous album. Like, it ranges from unpleasant to downright terrible, and it's on a few songs. So definitely kind of an issue there. Otherwise, great, even if it's not one of my favorite Children of Bodom albums, and that's probably already heresy. And you want to hear some other heresy? I'm going to put this in B tier, not A or S. Again, just my opinion. That upsets you? Put it down in the comments. Tell me why you think this deserves an A or an S. But again, 4 albums per tier, y'all. Like, there's other albums that I just enjoy personally more than this one. All right, next up we have Bellacore with The Frail Tide, and I know this is the cover for Stone's Reach. I mistakenly thought that Stone's Reach was their debut album, and then I was corrected, and I went back and checked out The Frail Tide. But the way Tiermaker works is you cannot remove an album once you put it in, and so I would have had to find all these album arts again and remake it, and I'm just too fucking lazy to do that. So, pretend that this is The Frail Tide. As far as this album goes, borrows pretty heavily from other already existing albums from the likes of Dark Tranquillity, In Flames, and Opeth. Very well performed, good dynamics. Overall, pretty solid. The only thing is that I think it's kind of lacking a real identity. I don't think they really truly start forming that until Stone's Reach, and especially of Breath and Bone, which is just fantastic. So if enough people enjoy watching this video, maybe I'll continue on to second albums and third albums as I have with some other genres on the channel. But as it stands, I just think that it's a little bit lacking in their own style. So I put it at C tier. And again, know that even the albums in C and some of the ones in D, I still enjoy. It's just that comparatively, not as much as some of the higher ones. Let's get into one of the other higher ones here with Scar Symmetry, Symmetric by Design. I only just recently started kind of digging into these guys, thanks to Chris, who does the written reviews on metaltrenches.com, where you can check out even more content. Solid mix here of harsh and clean vocals, almost kind of Opeth-y in how deep the growls get, and then also how soft and soothing the cleans are, which I really appreciate, and sometimes it can be hard to find vocalists who can do both so effectively. The riffs are kind of Soilwork-y, very sort of like natural Born Chaos vibes with lots of great groove, effective use of start-stops in the riffing as well, also quite a bit of synth, which I'm always partial to. Very strong debut. I'm also going to put this one at A tier. All right, another classic foundational album at the gates with The Red Sky Is Ours, and a band that didn't quite have their sound yet on their first album. And that's going to be another trend here, especially when we get into like the big 4 groups, that they don't really fully sound like themselves yet on these debuts. This one has almost more of like a grindy vibe in some areas, and then also the guitars and drums have kind of like this early black metal sound to them. The string intro on Windows is kind of interesting within context, especially considering where their latest album kind of circled back to more strings. Not a terrible album. I know some people like really love and elevate these early albums, but to me, it's like when you get deeper into their discography that they just get better and better. And of course with Slaughter of the Soul. But another one that's going to be sacrilege to some, and to them I say, go ahead and stay mad. Like if your ego is that weak that you can't handle someone's opinion about something as subjective as music tastes, that's your problem. So C tier for this one. All right, back to the really great though. We've got Insomnium with In the Halls of Awaiting. Hopefully this is kind of a redemption arc here. I even placed some of these to kind of like soften the blow of some of the tougher ones maybe. But this is a beautiful album. Great mix of riffs and atmosphere. Opens with that moody yet folky ill-starred sun, which really conjures imagery of nature similar to that on the album art. I think it really captures their sound. Love the dueling guitar lines on Medela, the slow build from the acoustic of The Elder, the endless hooks of Black Waters. Just a stunning, captivating piece of work all around. This belongs at S tier. All right, but back into those classic foundational albums. We got In Flames with Lunar Strain. So I still see people in the comments calling this their best album, and while I respect the people who legitimately mean it, because again, it can be just down to taste, right? I feel like most of the time it just comes off as people trying to sound like elite and kind of cool, like, yeah, it's the first album or no album. And like, it's just shocking to me because they have way better albums than this one. Like, come on, y'all. Like, clearly the Jester Race, okay? Horacle, Colony. I don't get it. But again, if you're one of those people that absolutely loves this album legitimately and holds it up as their number one, let me know down in the comments why you do. I love hearing those like actually thoughtful opinions on that. But anyways, I just don't think they've fully formed their sound. Again, I feel like it's barely an In Flames album. They don't even have the vocalist swap yet that they do with Dark Tranquillity, though I feel like Dark Tranquillity got the better end of that deal. As for the album, it's just fine. Just kind of dull, in my opinion. There's not much I find memorable about it. It's really the Jester Race, again, where I feel like is the true start of their discography. I'm going to put this one at C tier. Again, stay mad. All right, one that might upset the Omnium Gatherum fans out there. We have Spirits and August Light. And I like this band. They've got some really great riffs, but the vocals on this album are super weak, in my opinion. And even the riffs become kind of like more refined. The production gets better kind of later in their discography. I feel like this is a band that stumbles for a while before they kind of really hit their stride around like the 4th and 5th albums. So yeah, as far as this bunch, it's pretty low for me. I'm going to put it at D tier. Again, that doesn't mean that I would give this album a D if I was reviewing it. It's just comparatively, it's pretty low to the bottom. Speaking of Dark Tranquillity, though, we have Skydancer, and I have similar things to say about this one as I do to Lunar Strain with In Flames. It's just not quite Dark Tranquillity yet. Anders is doing the vocals here. And then to me, like, the jump from this album to The Gallery is like night and day. Like, those two bands had a pretty similar initial starting point where they kind of had these almost like demo-y sounding debuts, and then their second albums just like rocketed them to the top and entry as the big four. But this album to me is just very all over the place, lacking in focus. The production's also a little rough, understandably so, but there are albums that have that it adds to like the charm. Like The Gallery doesn't have like the best production in the world, but it suits what it's doing. Definitely also one of my least favorite releases to revisit from the band, maybe the least actually, and understand that that's from somebody who considers Dark Tranquillity to be one of my favorite bands and one of the best bands of all time with a great discography. So I feel like that says something that I put this one so low. Even despite some of the really aggressive moments, it's another one where I'm pretty bored. Not bottom of the pack, but still another C tier, right alongside Lunar Strain. All right, back to maybe another redemption. We have Kalmah with Swamplord, and this is just a triumphant sounding album. brimming with hooks and great synth work as well. Evil in You is a great opener with those folky leads just kind of like dancing around. Then there's the more warlike sounding Inheritance in Berija, the kind of eerie and ominous Dance of the Water, and of course fan favorite Hades. Very dynamic, not a dull moment, just a fun album through and through. I'm going to put this one at S tier. Next up is Moore's Principium Est with Inhumanity, and y'all know, those regular viewers out there, I love Moore's Principium Est and frequently call them one of the most underrated bands of all time, not even just in the genre. But I will say that this album is easily my least favorite in a really strong discography. So some people seem to really love this one, but I feel like it's really with the Unborn where things like get really, really good, like they really come into their own. But that said, I do find it more of an enjoyable listen overall than a lot of the albums on this list, and especially some of those so-called classics that we've been talking about. I think it's actually objectively better composed. Like, the songwriting is actually really strong, if not a little formulaic at times. But again, of the available options, I would still more likely choose listening to this album. And on my latest re-listen, just a couple days before I did this recording, I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I ever have, within this context. So I might actually put it at B tier. All right, another rough one that might make some people upset, and it's almost unfair because Hypocrisy's Penetralia, this band didn't really start off as a full-on melodic death metal band. This is more of a kind of traditional death metal album. There's some kind of connective tissue, I feel, with something like The Gallery from Dark Tranquillity. There's some melodeath elements on here, but overall it's more of an old school energy. But I will say, either way you slice it, I'm just not a huge fan of this album. I think Hypocrisy have some truly great albums that I've really been enjoying listening to, but this one in particular, again, comparatively to the rest of these, I wouldn't give it a D in a review, but it's D tier in this list. Then we have Amorphis with the Karelian Isthmus, and I really enjoyed doing that Amorphis tier list. If you haven't checked that out, I went through their whole discography for the first time, and that was really fun. But as fans know, this band went through a lot of iterations with their sound, kind of going from melodic death metal to progressive to straight up rock, and then back to melodic death metal, all over the place. This album in particular is also kind of a mix of old school and melodic death metal, but more so in that melodic death metal realm than that Hypocrisy album. Another one I'd kind of compare to Dark Tranquillity's earlier work, but also interwoven with a little bit of early Amon Amarth too, I would say. I dig the subtle synth atmosphere, but the songwriting is a little bit clunky. The vocal performances leave something to be desired, which is easily the worst element of an otherwise strong release. Honestly, with better vocals, I'd probably rank this one pretty high, but as it stands, I'd say it's more of a B. All right, next up is one that always seems to be a little bit controversial in the comments. We've got the Black Dahlia Murder with Unhallowed. As far as their discography goes, I really enjoy this one, and Trevor actually lists it as his #1 album from their discography as well for a number of different reasons. And this was also the thing that just rocketed them immediately to the top of the scene, which was kind of a cool thing to see. In real time too, because this was actually an album I was around for and actively in this music when it came out. And I will say, yes, this is melodic death metal. I have people argue that it is not, because it is markedly different than a lot of the other albums on this list in terms of its style. It's just more of a modernized, kind of Americanized version of the sound. And I will say also that this album is probably the most inspired out of their whole discography by the classics in death metal too. There's a lot more kind of Cannibal Corpse and stuff mixed in here as well, but those riffs are just undeniable. They really are. It is just a fun album to listen to. I have a soft spot for it. I've been listening to it since it literally came out. So many great tracks, but probably top 3 for me on here: Funeral Thirst, Elder Misanthropy, and Closed Casket Requiem. Really just start to finish, still holds up. I'm going to put it at S tier. Fight me.
Let the hate flow through you.
And another one that sometimes people take issue with is Amon Amarth with One Cent from the Golden Hall. But I love this band. They've been kind of faltering for me on their latest 2 or 3 albums, I would say. But I love this debut. It's also much more aggressive than some of their later stuff. Their first 3, maybe 4 albums especially are kind of just really bringing that hellfire. I feel like they're fitting to this album cover. Lots of just banger tracks on here. Ride for Vengeance, Friends of the Suncross, the title track, Without Fear, Abandon, also the slower titular Amon, Amarth. Really enjoyable. Maybe not top, but I'm actually going to put it all the way up pretty high on A tier. Another kind of rough one for me, Arch Enemy with Black Earth. And this was an album that, despite having listened to their discography a lot over the years, I hadn't really spent much time with this album. The riffs are decent, but kind of like a carbon copy of In Flames with some bluesy parts mixed in. But this one, I'd say, more than any other album on this list, the vocals are bad. Really bad. I think the other ones, I'll say that, they're still okay. They've just got some polish to work out. This one just terrible. I even describe it as goofy caveman shit kind of vocals. It's embarrassing. I visibly winced on my last re-listen. I did not remember them starting this rough. And then also the production is really muddy. And I'm genuinely surprised because I love Burning Bridges. I listened to that album a lot and would rank that one pretty darn high in the list. Again, if we progress from here, I think that'll rise pretty close to the top. But as far as this one stands, it's a D for me. Then we have The Haunted with The Haunted, another one where I feel like once we get into The Haunted Made Me Do It and One Kill Wonder, those are the true bangers, must-listen albums of this discography. But this one's pretty good too. Riffs are kind of more or less a continuation of Slaughter of the Soul, but also trying to kind of be Pantera at the same time, especially in the vocals. There are some very Phil Anselmo sounding vocals on this album. Even the cover is kind of reminiscent of some of Pantera's later albums. But I love the energy of it, just full speed ahead most of the time with all the skank beats and some thrash influence. Not as good, again, as the next two, but pretty fun. I really like In Vain and Bullet Hole in particular. I'm going to put this one kind of lower down on B tier. And then throwing this in as kind of a fun little surprise, we got Tribulation with The Horror. And some people may not know that before Tribulation became famous for their kind of darker, slower, more moody music, they dropped this underlooked gem that a fan recommended to me years ago, and I'm so glad that they did. And that's part of the fun of this channel too, is that I get to recommend a ton of music to y'all, and then y'all get to return the favor with me plenty of the time. So this is me again passing that knowledge back now to those of you who aren't familiar with this, but honestly, this is my favorite album from Tribulation, just being a huge melodic death metal fan. It absolutely rips. Every single song is just a total rager, especially if you like that kind of at the gates Slaughter the Soul style. They have kind of their own little twist on it. They bring a little bit more of their identity to it, and it's just, check it out, is the best thing I can say. And I'm going to put this thing at A tier. And then we'll close out with Soilwork and Steelbath Suicide. And this is a band where, on the flip side, I actually really prefer their early albums to their later stuff, and even some of their more popular albums, particularly the Chain Heart Machine. But this album was really great to go back and revisit. I had not listened to this one in a long, long time and had kind of forgotten about it. But man, is this just a stellar debut. Very strong start for them in terms of production quality. Always stellar riffing that right from the start has that kind of special Soilwork stamp. And it's something that's kind of hard to put your finger on because it's similar to In Flames, but just something about the tone and just how they play the riffs is just unique to Björk. Also strong vocals without some of the cornier moments on the later stuff. And I do like some of that stuff, but not as much as this. And also it gets in and out at just over 35 minutes or so, which I really appreciate and is kind of unusual for this time, really, where a lot of these albums tended to be bloated and overlong. It's we have all this disc space now, so let's fill it up. Not here. They were just less is more, and it totally is. And it leaves you wanting more. All killer, no filler. Razor Lives is probably my favorite on here. I'm going to put it at S tier. Y'all check out this playlist for plenty more metal tier lists. And check out this video for some of my melodic death metal favorites. Also, let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these albums differently and why? But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.